This will be structured in the following way. A moderator's introduction, you got that. Individual presentation and arguments. Each panelist will have 5 minutes to address the topic. Then we are going to go into a discussion between members of the panelists, and who knows, maybe even you can join in. Heitor, do we have an order? I think it's you. You're up first, but perhaps you can give us a little note on the abstract that I read out.
Sure. Thank you very much, Joe, and thanks to IAFOR for this great opportunity to have this really, really important discussion. I think we'll all agree on that. Thanks to the previous keynote speaker, who also set the tone for this conversation, which, of course, badly needs further unpacking. The abstract for this session was proposed and originally thought as maybe a bit too cryptic or complex for the context, which was really about having a more kind of open-ended conversation. So I decided to do something quite simple and straightforward. I opened ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT to write an abstract about a panel at IAFOR on AI, focusing on perspectives from Portuguese and Spanish universities. I even said, give it a title such as such and such. ChatGPT proceeded to do exactly what I told him to do. And actually, he used most of my words. So essentially, he held a mirror back to me. Now, I'm not saying this is desirable, undesirable, good or bad, but it does signal this tendency for artificial intelligence to be an exercise in mimicry rather than the so-called creativity. Now, for us to understand this kind of dilemma a bit more, I think we could benefit from discussing what creativity might be. Because, as said before, creativity may mean different things to different people. Joe was addressing that. The difficulties, the lexical difficulties in traversing disciplines. But creativity is one of those words, despite the fact that it's quite ambivalent and actually quite subjective, people tend to agree that it's a good idea. Well, is it? Is it always a good idea? Again, it depends on what we consider creativity. In a way, part of what we're seeing in AI is what is called, and we've heard this term already a few times, hallucination. This kind of takeoff from tangible reality, from facts, from provable evidence. Is that creativity? Or is it more of a skill kind of based activity in which we, as art teachers, design teachers, teachers that address cultural issues, semiotic and semantic issues, actually have to confront the deep meaning behind this transition from creativity to hallucination, particularly in front of a generation of students who actually know how to do it better than ourselves. So that's my opening statement, Joe. I have a lot more things to say, therefore, let's move forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good. Excellent. Okay, I'd like to ask Susana of the University of Porto, Susana Barreto, to give your presentation. You have 5 minutes.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me, for being here. It has been very good to listen to the previous lesson from Professor Kloos. I am a professor in design, and my testimony here will be an analysis of what I've been seeing that is happening. And it reminds me these dazzling experiences that the students have at the moment with AI. In the 90s, when I first started teaching the software of image manipulation, Photoshop, it was fantastic, it was quick, it was precise, and as some academics said, Photoshop was like a silent designer who do things for you and have an amazing effect. But I also came to learn that the more proficiency the students have with the software, the more agency they had. And I think in that respect, of course, there are limits to the comparison with AI, because there is a lot of opacity in this world at the moment. But what I feel at the moment in teaching design in the AI context is a sort of a push and pull dynamics. In a way, they are fascinated with all the creativity, but they have issues of ethics and authorship. So I think that thinking in terms of education, what can an educator do in this scenario? I think the other day I was talking to a friend of mine, a colleague at university, and he said, well, they know more about this than we do. I think that they are exploring freely, and I think it could be our role as well as educators to help them and in this aspect of working with, like picking up on what Heitor said, the creativity, on authenticity, and framing their creativity and the ethic aspects of it. I think that that will help them to see AI not a master, but more of a tool, which at the moment I think it's still working for them as a master. Some of them, because of course there are different levels in classes and schools and personalities, but yes, thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. And the next to present is Professor Paula Casa.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me. So I teach ethics and political philosophy. I specialize in inequality between men and women, black and white, rich people, poor people, countries, generations, and even human and animals. And while I teach it, I observe my students all the time. I see the gender patterns, how the women wouldn't speak to a full classroom. The moment I divide in groups, they are chatting like crazy. I see the differences, you know, in patterns combined with gender and countries and so on. And I use very visual PowerPoints with almost no words, because people come from all over the world, and for memory, for attention, pictures work much better. And I use ChatGPT Pro and Mistral equivalent, which I've forgotten what it's called, because at home we call them Chatty and Misty, because my children use it as well. And so I generate PowerPoints with the information that I have acquire about memory, teaching, attention, given that we know lectures are a disaster for the human brain in general, but contemporary brain even more. They cannot retain the attention. They don't remember the information. Even the best students 2 weeks later recall a very small portion of a spoken lecture. So I use humor and shock, like images that are emotionally shocking and intriguing, or that they are funny. Because if something is funny, all the students want to know what the other ones are laughing at. Otherwise, they just feel like it's like the biggest punishment. It's like to be the one that doesn't find it funny. So I use artificial intelligence to generate this. But have I seen anything bad about the arrival of these technologies? Occasionally, there is a student who doesn't show up very much, doesn't say much in class, and so I don't have a clear picture of this student, and so I'm not sure whether, what portion of the essay was generated by him, right? But with the majority of the cases, like even I would say 90%, it's been wonderful. It has eliminated, or sometimes even more than eliminated, the differences that I find that are very unjust between native speakers and people who are speaking a second or third language when they come and have discussions in English always. The ability to interrupt others and say, for example, women always want to do it in a group because they want to check with somebody, am I saying something really stupid, or is it really a good idea that other people would want to know? So they do that with ChatGPT quietly without chatting in the classroom to see if it's a good idea. And of course, Chatty always says, great question. So they go and they do it. They don't realize how often does Chatty say, great question. So this has been a massive improvement. I still find that they don't use it enough because I keep on reading essays that have a lot of mistakes that Chatty could have corrected instantly. And I say, why are you doing that? You have to be better than ChatGPT. Then with the topics, if you are doing an author that is very sophisticated and complicated, say in philosophy, Jeff McMahon, Chatty tells me all the things wrong all the time. He can't understand the subtle differences, can't understand some authors want to say something, they don't want to say it like really in your face because they are talking about ethically controversial topics, so they don't want to say things about abortion, euthanasia, and so on very clearly, so I understand what they're saying, but Chatty doesn't get it. No. With other philosophers, say Peter Singer or some more popular authors, is always correct, and you can find in all of these very large books the best references. So in general, I see that it is reducing international inequalities in performance in education, gender inequalities, racial inequalities, issues of students, individual students that lack confidence or lack certain skills because they haven't had the parents that tell them this and that, or have a more cultivated conversation over lunch or dinner and so on. So, for me, sometimes I see some students coming from Africa and doing extremely well, and I think, my God, this has the potential to have a bigger impact than anything in eroding these inequalities since the French Revolution. Of course, there are other things that are more worrying. For example, when I write about animals, and I refer to slave animals because they are slave animals by any definition of slavery that ChatGPT has given me, it still tells me, oh, you really want to say that? There's always pushing you to the conservative side, always reinforcing stereotypes, or ask medical questions and tells you to consult the doctor and said, let's see what he says. In Spain, medicine is completely female, no? But you still find these things that that who has put the information there. So there is a reproduction of the inequalities and the points of view that are more represented, and it appears as subjective, but somebody has put them there. So we have to be aware of that. But taking this into account, I think the potential for removing inequalities and improving education is enormous. I also haven't found any sort of decrease in in attendance because of that. On the contrary, people are a bit tired of the machine now, and they want real interaction. So I am more on the positive, optimistic side.
Thank you. And moving on to Carlos Alberto Scolari, also of the Universidad Pompeu Fabra.
Thank you. Good morning, buenos días, bon dia. Thanks for the invitation for joining this great conversation. I have 5 minutes, 3 ideas. First, I work in the field of media and communication studies, and our conception of artificial intelligence we do not have one. There are so many. Our conception comes from the 20th century mass culture. So we have a negative apocalyptic vision of artificial intelligence that we have been formatted by this vision. Skynet, iRobot, what else, the Matrix, and so on. These artificial intelligences, or just one that it wants to kill us and destroy Homo sapiens. So there's a very strong imaginary. And I think we have a lot of work to do to break that, okay? To be critical, not to be so optimistic. Oh, it's okay. No, it's okay. But we need a critical approach. But we do not need an apocalyptic approach. If you go to any bookstore now in Barcelona, you will find about 20, 30, 50 books about the end of crisis, the fallout, whatever. So we have to break this apocalyptic vision of this technology. We have gone through similar changes in the 80s with personal computers, in the 90s with the internet, late with the mobile phones and platforms, and this new way of this long transformation of digital technologies. But we have to break forget this apocalyptic vision that it's so popular. And this is one idea. And with my colleague Maria del Mar Guerrero, we are coordinating a Spanish research project about how teenagers are using AI now in Spain. It's a 3 years long project. We started a few months ago. So we will start our fieldwork in a few weeks. But we already have been in contact with the reality of high schools here in Barcelona, public high schools, and private one. We have a first data from the reality of teenagers and artificial intelligences. ChatGPT is the only one practically they know and they use. For example, in a class of 31 students, we are talking people of 15, 16 years old here in Barcelona, 31 students, 13 use ChatGPT every day. Only one is not using that. And that's happening all around the world. If you see reports from Australia, from Latin America, from UK, everywhere. Here we do not have a digital divide, I think, because all young people, maybe at the end of primary school, high school, obviously university, they're using ChatGPT. When you ask these young people where did they learn to use ChatGPT, TikTok. Only one professor knew something about GPT and explained that in a classroom. So they are learning how to use ChatGPT in platforms, especially TikTok. So we have a lot of work to do there. In between 2004 and 2006, I was the PI of an alpha project between Europe and Latin America to analyze the digitalization of media and communication studies. We analyzed the process between 1995 and 2005. It took 10, 15 years for digital technologies and knowledge to get into university in media and communication courses, and obviously high schools, about 10, 15 years. Now we cannot wait 10, 15 years to get AI into the curricula, into the formal educational environment. So how can we accelerate this process? Well, I think IAFOR is a great place to discuss about that. And finally, another idea, you talk about creativity, you come from design. In our department in Pompeu Fabra, we have the festival of cinema with AI. This year we had the 3rd edition, and every year we receive more and more movies made with AI. We had different versions, completely made by AI, only discrete made with artificial intelligences, a combination. And I think regarding creativity, I think if you ask ChatGPT to write a good literature, it's horrible. It's not good for writing literature. I think the best thing using LLM models, GPTs, for literature is when they make mistakes. I think from the artistic perspective, creativity, I think now, in this moment, the most important use could be exploiting the hallucination mistakes. People like Jorge Carrion, he's been experimenting with ChatGPT 4, 3.5, and 2.5, and the best literature outcomes, they came from the 2.5, because there were not so many guardrails, the model was not so politically correct, was more bastard, the answer of the GPT. So, but I think from, let's say, creativity point of view, literature, artistic, I think the hallucinations and the mistakes of AI are really useful now today as a source of possible creativities, breakdowns of the system, let's say. So I think, 5 minutes. Thanks, and well, let's continue the conversation. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think we've got quite a lot to grapple with there. I'd like to ask if, and I'll start with Heitor. Do you have any questions regarding the 3 presentations you've heard that you want to respond to or ask any questions?
Yes. Thank you, Joe, and thanks everyone for your really inspiring and thoughtful presentations. Can I actually go back to the Q&A that we just had before? Before I address the panel, I was very interested in a question that was placed about the whole issue of agendas, and how AI cannot be and should not be regarded as something that shows up out of nowhere without any kind of interest. There's clearly a financial interest, and I think we might be underestimating that. I completely agree with my fellow panelists that it's a good idea to incorporate AI in the classroom, as if we had a choice. However, I think it's just as crucial to acknowledge how, regardless of whether we want it or not, we are indeed immersed in a culture that promotes competition at the price, often, of wisdom, and, surprise, surprise, at the price of cooperation. Isn't it interesting that we hear about co-designing and cooperating and creativity, and yet we are so immersed in a deeply competitive environment where students essentially are hunting down that job that will miraculously put their lives together. And I believe that's one of the reasons why they're using ChatGPT so often. It's not so much because they're excited or amazed. Actually, they're trying to be efficient, because that is the quality that is being promoted and rewarded, professionally speaking. So they want to be efficient in order to get there first. This is part of the agenda. And of course, I don't want to get too ideological, because that's not the point of this panel. But I would like to remind those present of certain recent events that I think cannot go by unnoticed and must be discussed, at least in the classrooms that have to do with media studies and cultural studies. In the last couple of days, the president of a certain world power has started to share AI videos of his opponents, placing words of placing words that were never said in videos that are actually quite convincing. Also recently, in the episode of Charlie Kirk that we're all familiar with. During the mass celebration that was held in his memory, there were various communications, supposedly from beyond the grave, where Charlie Kirk, or the AI voice of Charlie Kirk, was telling everyone that he was okay. The problem is, people, of course, don't believe these things, but they choose to believe them anyway. And the problem I see with students often is precisely this dilemma of either going along with the flow and actually getting something in return, regardless of whether it makes any sense or whether it indeed makes them better human beings, or simply start becoming a bit too critical about things and be that 30th student that doesn't use ChatGPT. So I've actually engaged in an experiment very recently with some of my students. I don't have the results in, but the first assignment of this academic year has actually been to invite them to sit down and have a conversation with a chatbot and ask the chatbot where they should be and what they should be doing in today's world. I don't have the results yet, but I think it's possibly a way, I hope it is a way, to engage with artificial intelligence that will no doubt bring them back their own image, hold the mirror to themselves.
Can I ask?
Yes. Am I going on too much?
Of course, but you're an academic. That's
yeah, exactly.
we all suffer from that to various degrees. So,
Indeed.
But I wanted to take that point that you had brought to reference something that Paola had spoken about before, and that is you had said that people would ask ChatGPT if a question was good or not. So that's some reference to before it's we're asking the prompts and we're being good prompt engineers. Now we're engaging with chat. We've switched that role to a certain degree, and we're now asking if the questions that we're asking are good or not. Do you have any thought or concern about that?
Of course, because I want the students to ask all the questions, even if they think these are really stupid questions, if they really are stuck and they can't understand something, or something which has been presented as the standard view seems wrong to them, I want them to speak. So I prefer if they don't do that. That is only better than their remaining silent the whole time, which is what happens typically to women in a large classroom. No? So it's just better than some alternatives.
Are there any times in which ChatGPT or an equivalent will essentially shut you down for pursuing lines of questioning or lines of argument?
Yeah. Almost every day, ChatGPT tells me, "Do you really want to be so polemical? But didn't you say you were writing an academic paper? You know, should I? Would you like to see my edits with a more standard tone? You know." No, I want to be polemical. Of course, you know, what would you think? I'm not aware of the, you know, if it was already the standard view, there would be no point in my bothering being here for hours and hours, you know, explaining my argument. It has to be something different than the mainstream view. But constantly, whenever I ask for edits, even though my edits are, you know, remove necessary words except when it compromises clarity and mark changes in bold, it keeps on telling me things that I haven't asked, like, oh, it's just too polemical. You're like, you know, stepping out of line.
Okay. Susanna, would you like to respond to that?
I was going to say that I have a similar experience with ChatGPT. Sometimes I ask, and we tend to say him. I would like to say her. Sometimes I ask her, do a provocative question, and I don't have a provocative question back. But what I have is, do you want me to prepare a PowerPoint presentation or something like a manifesto? Yeah, so I kind of think that it's good. It's good. Sometimes I see students doing that for ideation, but it kind of stops there. It points me to other directions, to other formats, and not really like talking to a friend, if you like. It's not like talking to a friend, which sometimes on Instagram they say, ask prompt in GPT, like you're talking to a friend. But at this point, I think it's the end of the line. Now, for now, I think in the future probably it will be different. But yeah.
Okay, Carlos, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think this is the new generation, or the first generation that will grow up with the ChatGPT and other tools. And Marshall McLuhan, the famous media philosopher from Canada, he used to say that media transforms our cognitive system and our perception. Any media, any technology transforms us, and we do not pay attention to that. It's unconscious. We can see a generation that grew up with books, thinks different, perceives the world different from a generation that grew up with television, or the new generation that grew up with Wikipedia, Google, and GTA 5. So I think we have a new generation of people that we are going to speak different after our interaction with the ChatGPT. We are going to think different. We're going to perceive different. And the people who is creating, maybe remember how Photoshop changed the way of doing graphic design in the early 90s. Well, we will have a new generation of people taking different pictures, photographs, after working with different AI tools. So I think the most important thing with technologies, when they are so popular, the most important effects are not inside the technology, but it's all around, in places that we do not expect. So this is one. We are going to think different, we're going to perceive the world different, and we are going to talk different, to write different in a few months of years. And the other issue, and I go back to our experience in the school in Barcelona, is that I interviewed a young student, and he was not a good student, and one day he presented a beautiful work made with ChatGPT. The professor said, oh, did you write this? Well, no, well, write again. And I asked him, but do you still use ChatGPT? Obviously. And what do you do? I introduce myself the mistakes. So the student was introducing the mistake inside the text produced by the ChatGPT. Yeah. That's fantastic. I think we should work on that, because now textuality is back. Textuality is suspicious now. So everyone is asking, oh, who wrote this? The student, the ChatGPT, another AI. So I think this idea of the textuality is on the table and is suspicious, and everyone is talking about that. I think we should use that inside the classroom. It's a good thing to have this conversation about textuality, because we used to think our education is more visual, and people do not read. No, they are reading now, and we have to teach them how to critical reading and to be editors, to work on the textuality. I think we have to exploit this moment of suspicious textuality in the classroom. These are one of the possible collateral effects of this new technology.
Susanna, you had spoken about more proficiency giving more agency. Yeah. And I guess that's a process. I don't have a background in arts or design.
Photoshop.
Photoshop. But that's art's always been at this intersection of sort of practice and theory, and so this is at the heart probably of what you lot do in these art schools and these design schools, that perhaps we don't do so much if we're just in this world of writing. But you said here in terms of more proficiency being more agency. So perhaps you can speak to that in within how you're currently teaching or advising students, and then flipping it back. Does more proficiency within the students, perhaps, because they're perhaps more proficient in the newer things. When Professor Delgado was showing all these different apps and ways of sort of engaging, this to me was all new, and I was thinking, oh, I'd like to go and try out this or check this out. So how do you find that's changed how you teach and also how you assess? Perhaps we can move on to that.
Okay, I'm trying to incorporate ways of using AI into my classes, into the teaching of design, and specifically on software using. They sometimes are a bit embarrassed to say that they're using AI. Oh, I just did it for formatting, not really for generating content. And I don't think it should be like that. I think it's an add-on, having AI in this process. And for instance, specific examples, one of the things that AI does very quickly, precise and rigor, is resizing of images. In the beginning, they can also do a bit of ideation in AI, but what I feel is that they start with an idea in their mind. The more they know about AI, the more agent they are. It's a bit like I was comparing with Photoshop. With Photoshop in the 90s, I used to say, don't think with the mouse, don't create with the mouse, because they were like this in front of the computer. And the more they learn, the less they were hostages of the software. And my feeling, from my experience so far, and it's not a lot because this has been out for, well, 2023, is that if they learn how to use it, they will become more agents of this mechanism and probably use it in the similar way, like they're using other softwares, like a productivity tool. Because softwares now, they have incorporated a lot of AI. And we don't even know, like you said, Carlos, we don't even know that it's there, like the spam, but it's there. So I think what I'm trying to do is incorporate that in my classes, showing examples, and then showing as well the implication, the ethics of it, because you can't do everything, of course, but I think it could be a role that educators have, is to show around what could be done. Hopefully in a professional manner.
Heitor, I've got a question for you, but it's about how we use whatever these tools. What percentage of the time are students using AI? Because for me, I use it maybe 5 to 10 minutes a week. I don't actually use it that much. I should perhaps use it more. In fact, I asked it to. I started an essay, an article in summer, and I'd come back from walking, and I thought, oh God, I've got to write this thing, and I wrote it, and I produced about 2,500 words, and I said to AI, "Can you finish this?" And I felt really naughty. Because it finished it. And it came back, of course, with something that I wouldn't have written. I didn't agree with it, whatever it was. And then I sort of lost my temper and sort of did it the old way. And then asked for some human assistance. And in the end, it was written. But what percentage of the time are people engaging with AI, using AI? And what percentage are they just saying, okay, well, I've tried this, now I'm going to go back to this old way?
Well, Joe, I think it's really, really difficult to quote a number, first of all, because I have no idea, statistically speaking, but fundamentally because I don't think younger generation speaks in terms of such well-defined borders. You know, as was being said here, and apologies because I can't remember who it was, maybe you, Paula, but the fact that actually there's all kinds of technology that is incorporated these days into search engines and all kinds of online apps that really blur the line between what is your own agency content-wise and the interference of AI. What I can tell you, Joe, is that I did ask in the presentation class for the multimedia master's students this year how many of them had never used AI, and of course, they had all used it at some point. I think the relationship that this younger generation and these students have is very, very different from ours. I'm still able, like you, to step back and be critical about it. I think this kind of immersion that is taking place is also placing some very different parameters in that relationship. If you allow me another minute, I'll try to go a bit further without overextending my welcome. Part of the issue here, I think, has to do with what is called the attention economy. And you see, as Paulo was just mentioning, the interface, you ask for a certain prompt, and the interface keeps answering, suggesting further interaction. It doesn't want you to stop. It supposedly wants to perfect your text, but what it really wants is for you to stay there and hang as long as you can. Which leads me to a really interesting question connected with Professor Delgado's keynote, and then I'll shut up, Joe, I promise. Which is, if we have that hypothetical nothing university where AI does everything, what the hell are we going to do with our free time? Are we going to have pillow fights? I mean, is that the ultimate goal, as we see on ads? We're also assuming that wealth would be redistributed very nicely, which is a post-war ambition. Very honorable, but very wrong. We got it wrong indeed. Ultimately, and to wrap it up, I think this whole issue of the attention economy is the key to understanding how students and how far are students engaging with AI, particularly when we flip the equation. And rather than ask about those who cannot afford to use AI, how about asking about those who can afford not to use AI? I think we should think about that for a bit. How about being able not to use AI as a benefit?
Just a quick. Yesterday, I was asking a group of students your question, how many hours? And they said 5 to 6 hours a day. Just this.
So that's your answer, Joe.
There we go.
Sorry, I rambled on.
So I'm being very efficient.
Regarding this model of continuous interaction, the affordances of the ChatGPT asking us to do more, this is very interesting because Professor Carlos, he mentioned that the business model now is that of this subscription. So we can say that artificial intelligence there is the process of platformization. Mm-hmm. So you pay Netflix, you pay HBO Max, you pay Movistar, you pay also for ChatGPT other different AIs. So if you see the big actors of this AI economy, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Meta, well, all these big actors, they have social media, they have platforms, Amazon, Amazon Prime, Google, obviously, Meta, obviously. So they have a lot of data from users, and that's also useful for training the AI models. So the only big company that does not have a social media for getting data from users is OpenAI. So it seems that they want to transform ChatGPT into a social media. Mm-hmm. Imagine ChatGPT with comments exchanged between users because they know that increases the time that you spend there, and we are also going to, the time that we spend there is time that we do not spend on other platforms, obviously. This is like the audiovisual market, and also to get data from the users. So this idea is, this question at the end of the interaction is the same as the TikTok movement with the finger.
So I'd like to come to Paolo. I'll just make a comment and then ask you to respond to So Susanna, you had said 5 to 6 hours.
Yeah.
So all this time, that's quite a lot of time to spend chatting with AI. So it's what's all this time what are we going to do with all this time? We'll have conversations with ChatGPT.
They actually
potentially.
talk. They don't. They speak. They don't write.
They don't write. They chat.
Yeah, it's like a
iterative.
conversation. Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things, and again this was put up before, is that perhaps it will give us more time. Perhaps we'll go back to basics to consider more important, simple questions. That's at the beginning of what's the meaning of life, what's the point of life, those sorts of things. Are we going back to something different? Are we? What are we looking at here? What are projections of the future? Paul, I'm going to leave this with you, and also leave it to say whatever you'd like. Of course, if you'd like to ask ChatGPT if it's a good question or not before doing so, you may.
Well, I think it varies, but the fact that somebody spends a lot of time is not necessarily a negative thing. For example, I know that I spend more time than other people because I'm the sort of person who walks in the street and thinks, I wonder how sunflower seeds are split so that they sell them to you without the cell. For me, I am suddenly curious about this, so I want to know. And in the past, I would be asking these questions to people, and people would be laughing at me and saying, Paula, you have all these weird, curiosities. Now, the non-judgmental ChatGPT replies to me about all the weirder things that I want to know. So is it a waste of time? Well, I am acquiring a lot of information that I want. Sometimes it's completely useless, as in the case of sunflower seeds. It's just a curiosity. But other times, the information I request becomes very useful. And for me, it's also another inequality I didn't mention is between people who are like neurodivergent in various ways, and for them is really important. Even like people who have dyslexia. Like I have a extremely intelligent but deeply dyslexic son who is a programmer. And for him, the system of education that depends on reading and writing, especially in Catalan when he's British, has been torture. But he puts documentaries, videos, podcasts at like 4 speed that I don't understand anything. It just goes, and somehow, like as blind people manage to develop other senses, he has the ability to retain all that. So he has interactions with ChatGPT at incredible speed and in a way that is very different to the one I do, but it more than compensates his difficulties with the spelling. So the fact that you spend time in itself, it doesn't show anything. It could be that you're doing, writing really good work or acquiring a lot of information. Other times people would just do it for, like silly kind of things. But I wouldn't think the time itself is so crucial.
Those sorts of questions, such as what are sunflower seeds or how do they come from, that's what an English pub is meant to be for. After several drinks, these questions come to you, and I guess they're ways into more complex ones. The last thing we have here is around creativity. So are we, is this helping us to become more creative or the opposite? Are we being pushed along lines, perhaps unwittingly, that, hey, that's a great idea, but maybe you should be doing this in different ways. So who would like to take that? We have about 8 minutes left.
Sorry, Joe, it just kind of seems to fit what I was referring to in the beginning, so I'll just try to bring it back to that point that I was trying to make. I have no idea what creativity is. I still don't. for some people is eccentricity. For some people, it's actually hallucination and creating these kind of surreal pastiches of things we would never imagine possible. For other people, it's actually about skills and finding solutions for problems. So what kind of creativity are we talking about? I think in general, if you think about AI, I see it being very good at technical tasks. I use it for translating and proofreading and stuff that is actually pragmatic. When I start asking him to generate content, I'm actually really dubious, not just of the outcome, but also very aware of what is called content collapse, which is the fact that AI is currently training on its own hallucinations. And this may trigger a really strange spiral in which ChatGPT is learning from its own mistakes and incorporating them as legitimate content. So in a nutshell, what is creativity, Joe? I ask back, and not just for you, but to whomever would like to throw in some ideas.
Susanna?
Thank you. I'm going to talk about creativity in a classical sense, if there is such a thing. But in these last 3 years, and talking to colleagues of mine at the university, I haven't seen a decline in creativity related with AI. I think AI is one thing, is exploring, and the other thing is actually what they're doing, the way they're responding to their assignments, the expression, the out of the box, what they have to propose. So I haven't noticed that so far. But well, this is my testimony.
Okay. Paula, you like?
Well, in philosophy, we have had some geniuses that completely changed the field of ethics and political philosophy, and now we don't have anything like it. Everybody is like, a slightly different argument, and things have become very boring and repetitive and self-referential and so on. But and I don't expect the students to invent, a new theory or something. But I focus on individuality rather than creativity. So the reason why I have less problems than other teachers with ChatGPT and Mistral is that, so first I tell them what is it that they're really intrigued by or bothers them. When they open the newspaper, is it Gaza, is it Ukraine, is it whatever, and something completely different. Like I had students writing about the ethics of surfing or the distributive justice of surfing. So whatever it is their passion, to go with it. And we said that at the beginning of the course. So even whatever much they use ChatGPT, they are doing their thing that is really only them with their experience that is trying to write the best essay on that particular thing. And then 1 hour every session, I let them run it. And so they use, of course, they use Mentimeter, they use Kahoots, they use all kinds of things, and they use all ChatGPT and so on to impress the others, because I let them run the show and make it very interactive. Like they have to vote all the time. So I see the impact of one argument in favor of that position, suddenly it changes. And you can sometimes see through the Mentimeter, for example, you see the thing evolving and changing, or other times you just see it directly in the people's faces or hand raising. But if you get the students more involved and let them do their thing, whatever is their passion, I think all of this is less of a problem. And not everybody is equally creative, but everybody is their own person. No? So I prefer to run with that.
Okay, thank you.
I think first I talk about the collateral effects of different technologies, and I think one of the collateral effects of these technologies is that we are discussing what creativity is, what intelligence is, and that's another sign that this is a disruptive technology. Thanks.
Okay, we've got a few minutes to bring this to a close, but I just wanted to pick up on one of these things that came up is that there's going to be time to do other things, or more time, greater time to explore, perhaps to explore things creatively or differently. but also in a way that perhaps makes you understand what hard work is. And this was something that came up in the first presentation. A few weeks ago, I did an intensive language course, and I did 8 hours a day, and over the space of a week. And it was pretty brutal, but it also worked. And it was essentially, I had been using Duolingo for about 5 years. I'd been using all sorts of other things that were, if you like, stand-ins or excuses for old-fashioned hard work and effort. And so perhaps this will give us an opportunity to re-engage, as it did when I was writing with my article, as to what constitutes leisure time and what's necessitated in order to actually produce something, however it is, and however it's produced. You can't really produce things meaningful without some form of effort and concentrated effort. So perhaps this intersection between technology, AI, and humanity and human intelligence will help us find answers to questions from the small and seemingly unimportant to the large and meaningful.